So bad, Jan and Connie, you guys. Caitlin, you good? All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for taking the time to be here on Election Day. Philadelphia has truly delivered. It's a beautiful day outside, nice and hopeful and optimistic. But I sincerely appreciate all of you being here. I do want to acknowledge our CEO, Michael Heller, who is with us today. Michael has been a supporter and certainly a champion of the Beltway Briefing and has encouraged us since we began this years ago, which is kind
amazing.
Kind of hard to believe, but here we are. I'll admit that there is a sense of trepidation, at least with me. We did this 2 years ago, and I had absolutely no concerns whatsoever about what would happen on election night. And we sat here and we yucked it up and made jokes and we're all convinced that the election was going to go one way, and then many hours later and many drinks later, we had a Trump presidency. So I will say that whatever is said today, please certainly take it with a bucket of salt and chase it with as much bourbon as your body will allow. My name is Blake Rutherford, and I'm certainly pleased to be here with Mark Alderman, the chairman of Cozen O'Connor Public Strategies, and Howard Schweitzer, the managing partner of Cozen O'Connor Public Strategies. Gentlemen, here we are again. All right, so I thought
a little different result than last time.
Well, I mean,
that's an interesting way to start.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
I wore different shoes.
Yeah, you did. I noticed you had your convention shoes on, which is good. You wore your voting jeans, which is nice. You're very stylish.
It's perfect for radio.
Sure,
my
exactly.
question is whether you're going to be watching election returns tonight, Mark, or Duke Kentucky or Michigan State, Kansas.
I'm going to tape the election and watch the game.
So I thought before we begin, I would frame our discussion a little bit and talk about some things that really haven't gotten a ton of attention this election cycle, like Beto O'Rourke. That was a bad joke. It was a bad joke.
It was a bad joke.
Yeah, it was a bad joke. So, I was surprised a little bit, although I don't know that I should be, that $5.2 billion were spent on the 2018 midterms, more than $1 billion in independent money. And of that $1 billion in independent money, 90% of it was on negative ads. And we talk about cynicism in politics and people being fed up with politics. I think we can understand why. We'll talk today about the Senate and the House. 538, our friend Nate Silver, gives the Republicans an 83% chance of holding the Senate, which seems like pretty good odds. But if you flip it around, would you get on a plane that had a 17% chance of crashing? That's a rhetorical question. All right, we're getting some laughs now. We're gonna liven this up a little bit. Come on.
The trend line's good,
but it was also good in 2016.
I'm gonna get to that. I got lots of stuff for you today. 26 Democratic seats. Senate seats are up this year. Tough map for the Democrats. 10 are in states that Trump won in 2016. Democrats hold a 2-seat majority going into tonight. The most endangered Democratic seat, North Dakota. The most endangered Republican seat, although it's an open seat, Arizona. The most endangered Republican incumbent, Dean Heller in Nevada. And that's Nevada, not Nevada.
Correct.
Got it. Yeah, right. Okay, good. We're live with
doing well.
No, I'm hanging. I've got this. I'm rolling, man. Our big states to watch tonight, we'll talk about some of them. Florida, Missouri, Indiana, Tennessee, West Virginia, Texas, Montana, New Jersey. And although no one's really thinking about it, you've got a 3-way open race in Mississippi. where it looks like the Democrat, Mike Espy, who was a cabinet secretary under President Clinton, will make it to the runoff. He probably will not win that race, but at least the Democrats are making a good fight of it. The Republicans in a bit of disarray in Mississippi, so something to think about. And if you notice, we're actually talking about some southern states for once, which has not been something that we often talk about when it comes to Democrats being competitive. In the House, Democrats stand a much better chance of winning, nearly flip it around, almost exactly the same, 83% chance for the Democrats to retake the House, which sounds good, Howard, except that, of course, Hillary Clinton had a 71% chance of winning the election, and she lost. So, again, where's your bucket of salt? Where's your bourbon? Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Hillary lost because she couldn't motivate white working class voters to vote for her.
Ohio.
Well, yeah, but if you just take those three states, she wins. The point being that one thing went wrong for her. The thing we'll talk about today is what are the many things that would need to go wrong for the Republicans in the Senate to lose the Senate, or for the Democrats to not retake the House. We'll talk a little bit about that. What's good for the GOP right now? The economy. The economy's doing very, very well. Consumers are optimistic. Unemployment is low. Inflation is low. Wages are increasing. Michael just told the three of us that wages are definitely increasing. So that was great by virtue of this effort. Although I need to mention that unemployment is low. Might be a bit higher after this as well. The 2010 redistricting, which hasn't gotten a ton of attention, was enormous for the Republicans. They were able to redraw the districts in a way that was incredibly favorable. Here in Pennsylvania, we've seen the effects and after effects of that, and so we can't discredit that. Even though the Democrats are likely to win the overall popular vote in congressional districts, they have to win it by estimates of 5 to 7 points in order to actually retake the House, because the districts are drawn in such a way that favor the Republicans. And, as we always say, winning is governing. There's no glory in losing in politics. You don't get to do anything. So the Republicans took advantage of 2010, which is why everyone should pay attention to governor's races in certain states, state legislatures, secretary of state races, so on and so forth. So the Democrats,
school board races. Everybody comes from somewhere.
Exactly. So that's what's good for the Republicans. But Trump has chosen to run on immigration, despite the speaker and Republicans will talk about Representative Brian Fitzpatrick's race, who wants his race to be about the economy, not about immigration. But he's having a tough time because the president is deciding to make it about immigration. So that's what's good for the Republicans. And it's generally really good. A strong economy would suggest that the president would do well, or at least less bad, in a midterm year. We know that since World War II, the opposition party gains roughly 7.3% of voters, so which translates itself into anywhere from 5 to 9 seats. Sometimes it's much bigger. Sometimes, in rare cases, it's lower. But generally, the opposition party wins midterms, and the reason for that being it becomes primarily a referendum on the party in power, also known as the president in this case. And Trump's unpopular. He's got a 41% approval rating, if you believe CNN's poll, Mark. And
I thought it was 39.
Was it 39? Is that how it is?
Yeah. But it was 46 in the NBC Wall Street Journal
CNN
poll.
is obviously the standard. So,
yeah, right. So
I thought 39 was a little high.
Yeah. So you got an unpopular president, and you've got a notion that we've talked about a lot, which is candidates matter, especially in House races. A very large number, I won't say the largest, very large number of Republicans chose to retire this year, creating open seats across the country. Democrats are competing. They have a candidate on the ballot in all but 3 congressional districts in the United States. So they fielded 432 congressional candidates.
By the way, Blake, the fact that there were so many Republican retirements is, I mean, they were listening to what the market was telling them. They know what's coming. And that's why there were so many R's that hung it up.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that and talk about the implications of that in terms of what we expect from this new Congress. You also have, and I've talked to a lot of people this morning who have voted. Thank you. I hope you all are able to get out and vote today. There's an enthusiasm gap. The Democrats are far more energized than the Republicans. The Democrats have won the money game by a disproportionate amount, and as much as it may shock the conscience that we've spent $5.2 billion to elect people to public office and what we could better use that money for, needless to say, money is a driver of enthusiasm and momentum, just as the same way that yard signs are a driver of enthusiasm and momentum. And so this is where we sit. And I thought that we might talk about, first, it's been 700 and some odd days since we've done this, which the years go by fast, even if the days go by slow. And I'm curious about, in that time, what stood out to you? What has either surprised you, shocked you, disappointed you in the context of just the broad political climate? Mark, we'll begin with you.
Well, I think when we last did this, we thought the election was coming out one way. It, of course, came out the other way. I think there was a period of time when men and women of good faith on both sides of the aisle tried to imagine a Trump administration that was less divisive than the campaign had been. And I think we sit here all those days later with it having been even more divisive than anybody imagined. I think, in a sentence, I think it's been worse in that regard than expected. We've been waiting in our conversations for Trump to pivot. He was going to pivot after the primaries, then he was going to pivot after the general, then he was going to pivot after this and after that. Pretty clear that this is who he is and how he intends to govern. That has been, I think, surprising to a lot of people, surprising to the country.
Howard?
I'm surprised that Nancy Pelosi is still the leader of the Democratic Party.
I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming.
No, I am actually surprised by that, but I'm also surprised by the extent to which the Republicans, the more extreme Republicans in Congress, have embraced the president and vice versa, because he's still not a Republican. I mean, he's governing as one, yes. Politics make strange bedfellows, yes, but he's not he's not a Republican. So the fact that the Tea Party R's in the House are embracing him, I mean, he's spending at record levels.
Right.
So how does that align with the Freedom Caucus folks in the House? So that's surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about sort of the outsized role of Trump in the context of politics, because you touched on the fact that Republicans have very much gotten in line behind him, and to your point, the tax cut essentially ballooned the deficit. It's at its largest level that we've seen in quite a while. So this notion of fiscal conservatism sort of goes by the wayside. Mm-hmm. if you believe in that as an ideological Republican big R. And so I wonder, Mark, what do you make of that fact that Trump he wades into political fights, he endorses candidates in primaries, he has, is happy to fire cabinet secretaries on Twitter. And the point being that he looms quite large over everything that is going on in our politics. What do you make of that?
Nothing good. Make nothing good of it. We've never seen anything like it before. I think that, as I said a moment ago, his governing philosophy is divide and conquer. And as Howard said a moment ago, the Republican Party has signed up for that, which I don't think we all
Both parties.
would have predicted.
I mean,
well, that's where I was going. That has caused a divide and conquer reaction. It's some Newtonian law of physics here, an equal and opposite reaction, and we just keep getting driven.
so you're blaming Trump. Everybody that listens to our podcast knows I'm not a Trumpster, but you're blaming Trump for the division within your party.
Not the division.
Or the partisanship, or the...
I'm pretty sure Trump's responsible for the weather today.
He would tell you that he is. He would gladly accept that.
Yeah.
Well, and I believe it. I believe it.
Look, there's a question in my mind whether Trump is a cause or a symptom.
He's both.
He is both.
Clearly both.
But I mean, just look at the media. No offense to people in our audience who are members of the media. 24/7, 365, Trump, 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 Trump. He takes advantage of what the opportunity the media gives him. He's a master manipulator, but he didn't create that. The media gives him a pulpit to go up and do what he does, and that's why he got elected president.
Yeah, but there's something. I mean, we have to, I think, admit that there's something, and I think what I'm driving at is there's something particularly unique to Trump, because if you go back and you look at the amount of free airtime Trump got just up to February 2016, so we're just past Iowa, New Hampshire. That's it. We're not into South Carolina. $2 billion. If you were buying it, that's what it would have cost him. $2 billion in free advertising.
He's a media magnet.
At that point, he had only spent $10 million in advertising. And to flip it around, at that same time, Jeb Bush had spent $82 million in advertising. And Trump dwarfed the field in free media. And I guess what I'm driving at is, and to build on your point, Howard, are we now in this? The macro question is, will our politics ever be the same again?
I don't think so.
Because are we now in this sensationalism era where you have to do enough to get attention? There is no such thing as a boring candidate. There is no such thing as a steady of the road candidate. You've got to dominate Twitter. You've got to convince television producers to cover you. All those types of things.
Well, no offense to your senator from the great state or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but Bob Casey was not exactly Mr. Twitter before 2016, and in the last 2 years, he's exploded on Twitter. There's a perfect example of somebody, no offense to our friend Bob, who wasn't particularly dynamic and now tweets all the time at a much harsher level. So I think he has changed.
The media
politics.
of political communication have obviously changed. Trump is a symptom and cause both of that. But let's look at where we are today. Here's where we are today. Trump continues to conduct these circuses. His rallies are rock and roll shows where he's the star. They continue to get covered because they are sensational. They are, as Howard says, must-see TV. There's an element of watching a train wreck, not knowing how far off the rails he is going to go. But where we are today is that CNN, NBC, and even Fox have rejected and taken off the air an ad that the president approved and ran because it was unarguably racist and unacceptable. So it's reassuring that there is at least that limited consolation, that limited barrier and boundary. Trump's blown through a lot, but he couldn't get that ad up. And we'll see what happens tonight. The candidates who are going to get elected tonight, Sandy can tell you who they are. Sandy knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, there's going to be plenty of audience participation.
It's all on
here
a napkin.
Sandy's going to tell us what's going to happen.
But the candidates who are going to get elected tonight are going to win in congressional districts because they went out and worked, not because they were on CNN or even local cable. And Trump, meanwhile, has been barnstorming in the deep red races, and he'll move the needle there. He'll move the needle in North Dakota. He probably already has, although that, I think, is more Kavanaugh. We should come back.
Yeah, that's what
I want to place a marker for Kavanaugh here. But let's see what it looks like tomorrow, because I think we're going to be sending a lot of people to Congress and some boring people to the Senate, like Bob Casey.
You said that.
Bob's my oldest friend in politics. If he were here, he would be nodding. Yeah, absolutely. So,
but I think
Tad's here. Now we're getting started. I didn't see him come in.
But the question is, have we changed politics? And the answer is, how can we not have?
Yeah. But have we changed it irretrievably, irredeemably? Are we really just simply going straight to hell? Or
are we already there and we don't know it?
Well, I think. Yeah, I think it's not there, and I think we're going to climb a rung or two up on Dante's ladder tonight. I think we're going to get to the 8th concentric circle.
Unfortunately, 2018 hasn't happened yet, but Mark, 2020.
Wait, what's today?
I mean,
we didn't win yet?
There are candidates who are going to run on the Democratic side of the aisle who are going to try to out-Trump Trump. Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, the various folks on your side of the aisle who are carrying the mantle for the Democratic Party are Trumpian themselves.
Well, you have a thing with Senator Warren, we all know from your prior life. So I'm going to just let that go. Let's see.
But they are all about promoting themselves. Is the point.
Sure.
I mean, everybody in politics is.
That goes back to Washington.
Bernie Sanders ran on a bunch of lies too in 2016. Mark, absolutely. He promised free college for everybody. Was that going to happen?
No.
Medicare for everybody. Is that going to happen?
Maybe.
Read your briefing packet. Every single Democrat is running on Medicare for all. Didn't you read Hope and Greg's work?
I did.
Medicare for all. Every Democrat is running on Medicare for all. That's a house of cards too.
Some are, some aren't. Not everybody is. But those are our programs. There's a difference between hundreds of factual
I saw on
lies
CNN yesterday 6,420 lies since he became president.
Factual lies, like that paper is yellow, not white. That's different than saying Medicare for all.
He's his own worst enemy. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it, but Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are both going to run for president.
Maybe.
Here we go.
One of them.
And they're going to lie their way through the campaign. They're going to promise things that aren't going to happen.
Well, sure, but that's not new. What Trump has added to the mix, he's taken us into another dimension where not only do people running for office promise things they can't deliver, that's as old as probably not Washington. I'm going to go back to Adams and Jefferson. That's as old as the second election. But now we just simply lie about facts. It's not raining outside. There are 5 Muslims sitting here celebrating, not the 3 losers you see in front of you. You know, he is just simply lying in a different way.
It's awful.
And
right.
I am going to defend Senator Warren, whom I have no love for either, and Senator Sanders are not lying in that way. There's a difference between saying I'm going to do something that everybody knows you can't do and saying black is white, up is down, in is out.
Yeah, all right. So now that we've established that Trump's a liar and maybe it's not raining outside.
It shouldn't have taken that.
It took a while. It really did. It took longer than I expected, Mark.
I didn't finish.
We hold certain truths to be self-evident, but be that as it may, I want to, before we dive into some races that I think everybody ought to follow tonight, and you looking for your tie or what?
Setting that down. Yeah, I'm just playing with.
Turning on his mic. He's a little technologically challenged. Everybody.
Mark's great on Twitter.
Our listeners and viewers on Facebook Live, Mark, they weren't getting the full effect.
Yeah, I've heard of this.
I should have let you keep it off.
I heard of this Facebook thing.
So, all right.
Tell me about this Facebook thing.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's
what is it?
It's something to do with.
My kids do that.
Yeah, sure, and the Russians. So before we get into some races that I think are really worth following tonight, that I think will shape the trajectory of the country, will have a huge impact on 2020 as well. Which I'll come back to my very bad Beto joke. Get ready for Mark to explain how Beto O'Rourke's going to be president of the United States. That's a little preview.
The lie is waiting.
Yeah, it's a preview. Yeah, right. Sure.
Medicare for all.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I do want to touch on sort of the thematics of this election. You are hearing Democrats, at least the Democrats that are getting more media attention, focus on more left of center issues. Even O'Rourke in Texas is a Medicare for all guy. And Republicans really trying to thread this needle about how do I make my race about the economy, which is good as we've talked about, when the president wants it to be about immigration.
President wants it to be about the president.
Well, I mean, don't we all? But the reality is that it's a difficult dance for Republicans to deal with. In fact, Speaker Ryan called the president over the weekend, said, please, please, please talk about the economy in the last 48 hours. And Trump said, and I'm paraphrasing, thanks, but I'm going to talk about immigration. Because immigration won in the election in 2016. Now, in 2017, if anybody paid attention to the Virginia governor's race, Ed Gillespie ran hard on immigration. In the last 30 days, he lost by nearly 10 points. So it didn't work in Virginia. What do you make of sort of that issue dynamic? Not whether it makes sense for the country, but what do you make of it in terms of politically, strategically?
I think that's what is going to decide the particular elections that people are voting on today. You talked about the Texas Senate race where you have Beto O'Rourke running against Ted Cruz. Well, despite the fact that Beto has raised tremendous amounts of money nationally and had people like Rosie O'Donnell come in and endorse him, I'm not sure that was necessarily the best move, but he has run a campaign that's not just a little left of center, very left of center. Medicare for all, abolishing ICE, and impeaching Donald Trump. Much more extreme than people would have recommended he run. Right. And he's going to lose. He's going to lose. He should win. Ted Cruz is totally beatable. He's not well liked. He's a very beatable candidate, and he's going to win because Beto's run a bad campaign. And I think we have to look at each race and the issues that people have run on. At the end of the day, people are on the ballot. Donald Trump isn't on the ballot, and that's what's going to decide how people pull the lever.
Well, I think your question about the immigration clause probably doesn't touch that race, actually, because the dynamic is more what Howard said. But Trump choosing to close with a racist immigration ad that even Fox wouldn't run is clearly intended to turn out as many members of his base as humanly possible, and is yielding on everybody else in the country, because not only are most Americans not moved to the polls to vote for that worldview, I think it's hurting every place except where he's standing when he says it. When he's standing in North Dakota, when he's standing in Florida, when he's standing in Missouri, when he's standing in Indiana 3 times in the last week, sure, everybody who hears him talk about the caravan is going to vote. They might have been voting anyway, by the way.
Right.
But then it gets repeated and replayed in the media because it's must-see TV, and the people who see it in Bucks County, speaking of a race you said we wanted to talk about, people who see it in Bucks County are not coming out to support the barbed wire, the beautiful barbed wire at the.
I didn't know barbed wire can be beautiful until the president told me so.
It's all hyper local.
Yeah,
and
it's cutting the other way.
Yeah,
and I just want to say this about Beto, who is probably losing. Maybe
make a prediction, Mark. Come on.
Well, I just say he's probably losing. The reason he ran the way he did is twofold. One, Democrats have run to the middle in Texas for a long time and lost every single race. I think the University of Arkansas might have been national champion, Blake, in college basketball the last time a Democrat.
Tread lightly.
Last time a Democrat.
Tread lightly.
Was that a while ago?
Yeah.
That was a
1994, thanks.
Yeah, that was a
bad year for Democrats.
But the other thing is, there's just a chance he actually believes what he's saying.
Oh yeah,
and
imagine that.
The reason he is doing as well as he is, and is likely to lose, but not by a lot, I don't think, is that he's authentic. He's authentic.
Yeah,
he couldn't have run as anybody else.
Yeah. I mean, he's the crowds are showing up. He's down 3. I mean, latest poll, depending on what you look at. We'll talk about that. But the Real Clear Politics average has it closer to 7 that he's down. So.
Yeah.
But you know, you never know. It's Texas. All right, let's talk about turnout in the context of all of these races. So let's get to the races, then we can talk about. I know people have experienced long lines at the polls this morning here in Philadelphia. Early voting numbers are soaring across the country, and this is starting to look a lot more like a presidential election year turnout than a midterm turnout. Talk about what that means. But let's start with the Brian Fitzpatrick race in Bucks County in Pennsylvania. We'll start with something local. This is the Pennsylvania first. It's the most competitive political race, I think, in all of Pennsylvania this year. The incumbent, Brian Fitzpatrick, who's a Republican, is running against Scott Wallace. All the polls have it, a toss-up. What do you guys make of that race? And why is that a race to pay attention to?
Because it's suburbia.
Yeah.
And those are the elections that are going to decide control of Congress. They overwhelmingly favor the Democrats. I mean, many more open seats, many more vulnerable Republicans.
Hillary won this district in 2016.
But it's interesting on that
but
point.
So did Pat, too.
Yeah, so not bad.
Yeah. And there are districts we're going to talk about that Hillary won convincingly in 2016 where the Republican is hanging tight.
Yep.
So they go the other way.
Yep.
So it gets back to the point. It all depends what the local dynamics are, and it depends how strong the candidates are.
Yeah, Mark.
And he's a reasonably strong candidate. Yeah. He's a law and order candidate, former FBI guy, and he's run a good campaign.
And he's tried to run a campaign. This is where we were talking about earlier about the tension. He's tried to run a campaign on the economy, and he keeps getting plagued with questions about immigration. So it's interesting, in healthcare. Yeah, but this suburban notion, Mark, I mean, that's really where attention has been paid this cycle. What's going to happen in these quote suburban districts. So well, this is a bellwether for that. I think
it's a bellwether for that. Every district is its own universe, and there's some things up in that district that are a little different than in some other districts. For one thing, it is two white men running, which is different than the dynamic in a lot of districts. For another, the healthcare issue has been harder to tag on Fitzpatrick than elsewhere because he did vote against Trump on the American Health Care Act, although he had voted some enormous number of times to repeal the Affordable Care Act before that. And he is a popular constituent service guy. He could keep his seat. He could lose. If he loses by a couple of points, then these suburbs all across the country are likely to go blue, and that is going to mean more than 23 seats, because it is actually, as you said a moment ago, it's the suburbs everywhere. It's Republican districts outside of Kansas City. It's Republican districts outside of Chicago. It's Republican districts outside of Richmond.
Yep.
It's Republican districts outside of Miami. It's Republican districts all over California, where everything is basically a suburb.
And if you look at the New York Times has been conducting these real-time polls where they're calling people and reporting their results in real time, and all of these districts are like 1%.
Yeah,
someone's up, the incumbent's up or down.
And they actually polled this district too, and it was I think it was
1%.
Within 1%.
Yeah, and so I mean we're so close everywhere.
Well, and that's something that's worth mentioning. A wave election.
What, to watch CNN at 1 a.m. maybe? Is that what you're thinking?
Well, what I was going to say, I'll be watching CNN at 1 a.m.
A wave isn't.
I hope they're showing that poll again. 29% approval. Isn't that what it was? A wave election doesn't mean that you win every election by 10 points. It means that you win a whole lot of elections by 1 point. That's how this is going to build if it builds. So if you start seeing some of these suburban races, and I know we're going to look at some in particular, you start seeing more of them going one way than the other, that pretty quickly builds a significant number that Sandy will be happy to share with
right, exactly. Another race that I think, to sort of stick with that thematic, is the Virginia 7, which is Dave Bratt versus Abigail Spanberger. It's actually gotten a lot of national attention. This is Mid-East Virginia. This is outside Richmond. And she was a CIA officer. He is relatively new to Congress.
Unseated Eric Cantor. Tea Party guy. Plus 20 Trump district 2 years ago. And this race is a toss-up as well. So I think, not that there's certainly weigh in on the race itself, but I do think that those two, and then there's a Florida race I want to talk about, but those two in particular, and it helps that they're on the East Coast. We have a bunch of races in California. We're going to be up late, but I do think, Mark, to your point, those two races, if they break by 3-4 points for the Democrats, the wave is going, if there is a wave, it will begin on the East Coast, and it will begin there.
Well, and you got to drill down into why a Trump plus 20 district with a Tea Party hero as the incumbent is a toss-up. It's because, and it's easy to see in that district because we saw it in the Virginia gubernatorial election and the House of Delegates election last year.
Right.
It's because of the enthusiasm and intensity on the Democratic side, and it's because of suburban women who held their nose and voted for Trump in 2016 and have just had it, have just simply had it. and are coming all the way over to vote for the Democrat.
You know, it's funny. Our friend Jonathan Martin, who spoke at this firm during the Democratic National Convention in 2016, had a fascinating story in the New York Times a couple of days ago, and he focused on the Illinois 6th, which is a district that, in his words, encapsulates, you know, nostalgic republicanism. It has been a Republican district. This is outside Chicago. It's been a Republican district forever. It is that sort of glory days of Reagan-era republicanism. And it looks like the incumbent there, he is certainly in a very tight race and could lose.
Roscoe?
Yeah, Roscoe. Yeah, sorry, this is Pete, Representative Peter Roscoe. He's running against a newcomer to politics named Sean Casten. Interesting about Roscoe, he was elected to Congress in 2006, and he beat Tammy Duckworth, who is now in the United States Senate. But Jonathan sort of put his focal point on this district as well as sort of this Midwestern, sort of older Republican values district that seems to be remaking itself as well. So another race to pay attention to, and the last one that I'll highlight, we don't have to get into it, but I think is fascinating for a variety of reasons, is the Kentucky 6th, which is Andy Barr, and he's running against Amy McGrath, who is, one thing I will highlight, it's an undercurrent of this, although we haven't focused a ton on it, the number of women on both sides of the aisle who are running on their military service records, and Amy McGrath is one of them. And she probably ran the best intro ad of any candidate this cycle, completely unknown, never been involved in politics before, and she just runs a killer ad about her military service. We've seen other women come along and do that, and we'll, in the context of Arizona, I'll be interested to know why Martha McSally is not using that as part of a focal point of her campaign. But be that as it may, that's a really, really fascinating and I think wonderful thing to see. So follow and these are all pretty easy to remember because they're all the 6th. So, you know, follow the 6th and you'll do fine.
But Blake, can I just go back for a second when you were talking about Illinois? I think, and I know we're going to come to this later, but I want to place a marker. Don't forget the gubernatorial race in Illinois, where Illinois is going to go red to blue with the governorship, as will happen across the country. 6, 7, I forget what we concluded, Sandy, 6 or 7. But look at the Midwest.
Sandy, your fact checker, or is she your?
Sandy's my lawyer.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that a good choice, Michael? I made a good decision. Yeah. Well, I have a whole staff on it. But Trump became president. We said this earlier. Trump became president by blowing through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And 2 years ago, when life as we know it seemed to have ended and you projected out to the midterm, people were wondering what was going to happen to Bob Casey, what was going to happen to Sherrod Brown, what was going to happen to Tom Wolf, what was going to happen in the gubernatorial races. You are going to see tonight in the former blue wall that Trump knocked down and won the White House, you are going to see 4 incumbent Democratic senators reelected, not even close.
Yeah, you're talking about Debbie Stabenow in Michigan, Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, and Bob Casey in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Trump states.
Yeah, two
not even
things.
close.
2 things. First of all,
and you could see 4 Democratic governors.
Well, that's the next thing I was going to say, but I'll jump in here.
Well, first of all, this is what happens. I mean, there's an ebb and a flow in our politics, and things flip, and they flip back, and they flip again, and that's what we're going to see tonight. They flipped in 2010, they flipped in 2006, and this is the natural order of the universe.
But my point, let me just underline it, is when Democrats despair later tonight that we didn't retake the Senate, which we're not going to, don't forget seats that we did win and didn't lose that 2 years ago looked like they were at risk.
But I also think it's interesting, look at Ohio. I know you're pivoting to governors. Look at Ohio.
We'll go back to the Senate. I'm just doing what you guys are.
No. I'm going to talk governor. So you've got DeWine against Cordray.
Yeah,
running for governor in Ohio.
Former AG versus the AG.
Yeah, neck and neck.
Yep.
You've got Sherrod Brown running for Senate, winning by 30 points. What does that tell you? That tells you that candidates actually matter.
Yep.
It's not, people don't vote, they're not going to go and vote because they voted for Trump, 2 years ago.
No.
That isn't the way this works.
Well, and it's working the same way in Wisconsin, where the incumbent Tammy Baldwin is going to win by a million.
And Scott Walker,
the governor, it looks like he's going to lose.
Yeah.
Which is interesting in and of itself. I also want to talk about in terms of governorships, because I think you mentioned Illinois, which is going to flip. Tom Wolf going to coast the re-election here in Pennsylvania. You've got a competitive governor's race in Iowa, a state that has, of course, monumental effects on the presidential, where the Republican incumbent is in a very close race,
and a coin toss in New Hampshire.
Right.
The first two
right
presidential caucus and primary states are up for grabs tonight.
Let's talk about Florida, because we have a ton of races in Florida. Then we could spend this entire discussion just talking about Florida. But we do have a Senate race where the incumbent Bill Nelson, the Democrat, is running against the governor, Rick Scott, the Republican. And then we have a gubernatorial race where we have the mayor of Tallahassee, Andrew Gillum, running against
DeSantis.
Yeah, DeSantis. I was going to use his first name, but oh well. So what do you guys make of Florida? I mean, I always go back to, Tim Russert famous, Florida. It's very hard to talk about anything in politics without talking about Florida. So what do you guys make of that state?
Weak and surprising gubernatorial candidates. Nelson is the beneficiary of Gillum's candidacy because he's going to pull out the African American vote, and that's going to help Nelson, who's not the strongest candidate himself.
And polling right now has the spread both about +4. Both Nelson and Gillum seem to be polling about the same. Both Scott and DeSantis seem to be polling about the same, +4 for the Dems.
Yeah. Point out of the margin of error, so
right.
That's meaningful. I'm trusting your dad. Howard's dad reported from the west coast of Florida this morning that Florida's going blue, and I'm holding him responsible.
Good.
Stu Schweitzer will deliver.
Yeah. We've got Sandy Block and Howard's dad. This is good. We got a great team here. I'm loving it. We also have
A team.
Yeah, right. Sure. Well, we are not the A team. We know that to be true. So what I would say, that there is a congressional race, the Florida 26, that has a lot of dynamics going on. It's a 70% Latino district. The Republican incumbent is one of the most bipartisan members of the House. He's Cuban American. His opponent is Ecuadorian American. The race is a toss-up. This stretches. So this is sort of Miami, outside of parts of Miami-Dade, all the way down to Key West.
Yep.
So if you've ever had a really long night at the Overseas Pub and Grill in Key West, which a friend of mine's in-laws own, then you kind of know what's going on down there. And if you haven't, you got to check it out. But
there's some very competitive races.
Hillary but to your point earlier, Hillary plus 16.
Plus 16,
and it's neck and neck.
Yeah.
The Republicans in the race.
Yeah, so explain that, Mark.
Candidates matter.
Thank you.
We could have just said that and be done.
Now, what does your dad say is going to happen in that race?
Wrong coast. Wrong coast. No, but just on that, it would be a shame if a guy like Corbello lost, because what is happening is, so he loses, and you've got one less moderate Republican, centrist Republican in the House of Representatives. Now, you may be happy about that.
It would be a
From
shame if Curbelo won,
but
because he was a reliable Republican vote in the House.
It's more
And
right. Of course,
yeah.
of course, I get that as a general political matter,
but whether you're for it or against it is a political fact that Democrats are going to take back the House by beating moderate Republicans.
Right. And you were decrying before the fact that our politics has become polarized. Well,
yeah, we're not going to.
I know you're not going to be unhappy. You're not going to be unhappy about that if the result goes to the D's tonight.
Does it surprise any of you? Tim Kaine is on the ballot in Virginia, and he's spent the last 30 days, because the race is so much in his favor, campaigning for other candidates. Does that surprise you at all? Tim Kaine, Senator of Virginia.
It would have surprised me had the other Republican won.
Yeah.
But that is, in my mind, completely a function of the fact that the Republicans nominated an avowed white supremacist who even in Virginia can't get any traction.
I actually think he hasn't unlearned his lessons from 2016 when they sent him to Arizona in the waning days of the election. Well, he learned to go do other things when elections are on the line, Blake, and he hasn't.
Yeah, we could talk about all the. That's
in fairness to Tim, he's not speaking Spanish in any of these appearances, so he learned one lesson.
Let's go out west for a minute. Arizona is a race that looks very favorable to the Democrats. It's an open seat. Martha McSally is the Republican nominee. She's a congresswoman, and she's running against Kyrsten Sinema, another congresswoman. Looks like it might tilt to the Dems. Real Clear Politics average 0.02, so favoring McSally. So it's a tried and true toss up. Yeah,
McSally got pushed to the right in the primary.
Yeah,
and I think that really hurt.
Yeah. And we've touched on Texas. Looks like an uphill climb for all those reasons. Missouri, Claire McCaskill, the incumbent, is running against the Attorney General Josh Hawley. Tough state, went big for Trump.
19.
Yeah, she's in a tight race. What do you guys think of that?
She's tough. I mean, she's a good candidate. She's tough. I actually think she's going to pull it out. What do you think, Mark?
I think she might. It's an example of what I was saying before. Trump has gone into Missouri, has preached the caravan and all the code for racism and the rest, and it has electrified the people standing in the auditorium, and I think it has pushed away Republican women in the suburbs of St. Louis and the suburbs of Kansas City who weren't going to vote for Claire McCaskill because they had voted already for Josh Hawley for Attorney General, and they didn't think he was a bad guy. And then the caravan shows up, and we'll see which way that cuts. I think that's one where I think she is going to pull it out.
I think you are way overestimating the negative impact of his focus on immigration.
Well, we're going to find out.
We'll find out.
If McCaskill wins, that's going to be one of the reasons why.
If the D's win, it's going to be because of health care. Even though they're preaching this Medicare for all message that's
it's going to be
fiscally impossible. But that's going to be.
It isn't going to be
immigration.
Well, let's talk about West Virginia and this gets us to Kavanaugh. Because Joe Manchin, the incumbent Democrat, votes to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. He is running against a popular attorney general, a good candidate in Patrick Morrisey, and Manchin's gonna beat him by a touchdown at least. What do you make about the relationship between his vote for Kavanaugh in that race, if any?
I actually think, I mean, he was up before this happened and he's up still now. He's run a good campaign. He's a popular former governor. He's a good candidate. He voted, I think his vote for the prior Supreme Court nominee for Gorsuch was more important than his vote for Kavanaugh. I think he's holding strong because he's running a good campaign that appeals to, people in his home state.
Did you see his walking and shooting ad where he's got a gun and he just talking to the camera and then starts shooting things?
Yeah.
That was
West
something.
Virginia.
That was something. West Virginia, absolutely. That was something. Well, let's open it up. I know there are probably things that I haven't touched on that are of interest to y'all. So, questions, comments, anybody? Yeah, Tom. Oh, I'm sorry, Tad. Or Michael, you got anything first? We'll start with you.
What are your thoughts on the Georgia?
Yeah, good one.
Runoff.
Tight. Maybe runoff. It's
Nasty.
It's nasty. Yeah, I think she's going to come up a couple of votes short. It's a miracle that she's that close. But
Georgia's not as red, though, as people make it out to be. I mean, Trump won Ohio by more than he won Georgia.
yeah, there's just been too much trouble with letting people vote. It's been nasty, and there's been some suppression, and I think she's going to come up a couple of votes short. But I'll tell you, if she doesn't, and if Gillum wins, and especially if Beto becomes a senator, you're going to have new rock stars in the Democratic Party Wednesday morning. Any one of those three, or all of them, if they all win, are going right to the top of the list.
Okay, the list of what?
Leaders of the party.
Really?
Yeah,
Mark's
Oh, yeah.
political donations. That's where they're going. Yeah.
Question from a client perspective. So, business is good, and after the party's done, everybody feels better that they've won. The reality of it is that businesses are going to have concerns. Folks like financial services who will be looking at Chairman Maxine. When you talk to those clients to navigate forward, that's one thing. And a second form of prediction. Other than Mark and the people that are going to have, one of the most happy guy on the planet is there's going to be, to the points of the stars of the party, that's going to be his foil for sure. What are your thoughts on how?
Well, I'm going to do the second part, and Howard's going to do the financial services part.
Mark's going to do the easy question, and I'm going to do the hard question.
Yeah.
So this is very much playing out the way it plays out with clients.
Well, that's our deal. That's our deal. Trump's going to tell you how happy. First, he's going to tell you how he won the Senate, would have been gone without him. He's going to tell you how happy he is because now Andrew Gillum is the 2020 nominee of the Democratic Party. But I keep coming back to the Midwest, maybe because I grew up there and live in Pennsylvania now. It is not a good night for Donald Trump's 2020 reelection chances if Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Michigan are all blue. So he can be as happy as he pleases. There's still some facts that are going the other way. Howard's now going to answer.
I'm gonna give you a better answer to the second question.
They're going to talk long enough that you forgot your question.
Donald Trump is gonna be thrilled if Nancy Pelosi is the next Speaker of the House. It's that simple. And he's going to run against her in 2020. I mean, I think he's probably even hoping for it, because guess what? It doesn't change that much. And this kind of gets to the first question, Charlie. It doesn't. I mean, obviously, if you're a Republican, you'd rather have control of the House than not. But the way the media is presenting it, all the attention, I think you're right. It's more like a presidential campaign, Blake, than a midterm. It's like we're going to wake up tomorrow. There's going to be impending change of control, and like the sun isn't going to come up, or it's going to stay sunny all the time, depending upon your perspective. It isn't going to change that much. I mean, who can remember 2006, Bush's second term, midterm? Who was in the majority before and after? I bet many people can't remember.
Nancy Pelosi.
And I remember, you remember, but the fact of the matter is, it doesn't, like, if the R's take the House, you have to be attuned to what's going to happen in the House, because of course it has some impact, but there's still a divided Senate. The House is always going to be the House. You're always going to have more extreme policy coming out of the House, no matter who's in charge. If you look at the last 2 years, for example, or beyond that, the House has passed untold numbers of bills that they knew were never going to make it through the Senate, because the Senate is the chamber of moderation. So look, it impacts things in terms of the discourse. It isn't going to change things legislatively, because if you're looking to impact legislation, you have to be talking to both sides of the aisle already, because you have to talk to both sides to get anything through the Senate. It isn't going to change the personnel that get confirmed, assuming the Senate stays Republican, because the House has no role in confirming the president's appointees. It will change oversight of the executive branch. It does give the Democrats the mantle to subpoena, to engage the executive branch in a dialogue in a way that they haven't been able to without holding the chairmanships. So you've got to be paying attention to it. I mean, Maxine Waters, as chairman of the Financial Services Committee in the House, is a significant shift from Jeb Hensarling, but it isn't going to change things at the end of the day from a legislative point of view. It's more from an oversight perspective.
And just one other point on that. Maybe I'll make it with healthcare, in fact, financial services. There isn't going to be repeal and replace if the Democrats take the House. There isn't likely to be much health care reform legislation, maybe at the margins, but the administration is going to continue by regulation and by executive order marching through Obamacare.
Right.
And amending it as deeply as it can. And that, I think, will actually accelerate. It will accelerate if the Democrats take the House, because there will be no delay waiting to see if a Republican Congress can do it. The administration's just going to do it itself.
Back to 2006, I was in government then, and I was a Bush appointee. And I mean, you had Congress flip from R's to the D's, both chambers. It had zero impact on how I did my job. Zero. It did not. It changed what was coming out of Congress, but it didn't change what was ultimately going to pass, because Bush had the White House, just like Trump has the White House now. It had no impact on how I did my job at a senior appointee level. So look, elections have consequences. I'm not saying that tonight doesn't matter. It matters a lot. I think it matters a lot in terms of the future of the parties, but it's going to feel when we wake up tomorrow like there's been this tectonic shift, and there hasn't been.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I actually have many comments, but I'm kind of limited. We complications, professionals and amateurs like me, we often our opinions based on polls, and the polling that we see is, we know that at least that at least in several states, although I think that's correct. But this time, from what I understand, there's an influx in many places of first-time votes, and they could be on either side.
Right.
And so so if you all could a little bit, to what extent are these polls really are accurate enough to sort of pick up this influx of new voters, whether they are millennials or Hispanics or any other place. And so that's why, and there's some question about whether polls that we are discussing and offering opinions on are really are accurate, or even supposed to be accurate in many ways.
Right.
Yeah, Blake knows a lot about this, so I'll defer to him in 1 minute. But what I think is going on is this. Generals always fight and lose the last war. Last time, 2016, the polls overestimated Democratic turnout and underestimated Republican turnout, and that's how they got fooled. This time, I believe Democratic turnout is being underestimated because they're fighting the last war, they're using the last model. And to your point about new voters and voters who didn't vote last time but might come out, last midterm might come out this time. If the polls are wrong, I think they are underestimating Democratic. Now, if I'm right about that, it'll be a good night for Democrats. If I'm wrong about that, then I'm stupid. And my friends in the polling business are going to be looking for new jobs. Because getting it that far wrong 2 times in a row is a problem.
I mean, polls are always off. You look at Texas. In the last 2 presidential elections, both Donald Trump and Mitt Romney underperformed the polls. You know, polling is it's not an exact science. And if you look at the presidential, I was looking last night at all the recent approval rating polls for Trump, and the CNN poll was very different than the NBC Wall Street Journal poll. So somebody's wrong.
NBC.
And somebody's right. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not an exact science. Clearly, these are all of the toss-up races. All of them are margin of error races. So I think to your point, Mark, it's you know, if a little bit more turnout on one side or the other, or a little bit less turnout, that's what's going to make the difference.
Yes, sir. Hey, Pete.
Let's say that there's a vast swath of young maybe not like you.
Definitely.
I mean, how is that going to change in terms of our national legislation? We're going to have building. We're going to. I mean, there's a whole lot of things, but I wonder whether legislation.
We could definitely have an infrastructure package because Donald Trump wants to do infrastructure, and so does Nancy Pelosi. She has said so. She's already articulated the Democratic agenda for the next Congress during her speakership,
right?
Because she's already declared victory. But no, I think you could get infrastructure. No way are we getting immigration. There's no way Donald Trump is giving up the ability to run in 2020 on immigration. It was a winning issue last time. We'll see what the impact is this time.
What will be most?
Yeah, I mean, look, he's done deals. He sat down with Chuck and Nancy and cut deals on 2 spending bills. He's, again, go back to who he is. He gave significant political contributions primarily to Democrats forever. And this guy is not, he's a deal, he's who he is, as Mark always says. He's a deal guy. He's willing to cut deals. I think the question is, they're going to get to a point later in 2019, certainly in 2020, where they're not going to be willing to do deals with one another. because they're going to be afraid that it's going to give something up as far as the contest in November of 2020. But there's definitely, not on immigration, but on fiscal things, on infrastructure. Congress is going to pass a lot of bills that the president is going to sign. They always do. But I definitely think you could see a signature thing like infrastructure get done.
Yes, sir.
House flips.
Gotta see the Mueller report. Gotta see what he has. If he has nothing, he is a man of unquestioned integrity. If he has nothing, he'll say, I got nothing. And then Maxine Waters will still try to impeach. But the House won't. If he has something, yeah.
I mean,
I thought I was going to say that we were going to get through the entire discussion without anybody mentioning Mueller. But two things. Democrats taking the House is hugely consequential for what becomes of whatever Mueller reports. And to Pete's question, Democrats taking the Senate make that an even more intense possibility.
You know, it's interesting to build upon, you know, Michael's question. Russia is not in the Mueller investigation. Even, you know, the vast expose of Trump's family tax issues that was in the New York Times that got about 5 seconds of attention before we moved on to something else.
Sure.
You know, Russia, the Mueller investigation is not impacting voters one way or another. It's low on the priority list. And it's not been a focal point of too many. I mean, candidates just aren't talking about it. They're on to healthcare. They're on to the other issues that you mentioned. Does that surprise you at all?
No, I think people are motivated by their economic situation, and immigration on the Republican side and healthcare on the Democratic side are proxy issues for the economy. People are voting based on how their lives are going. They're not voting based on nonsense, you know, over here.
There is a lot of speculation in Washington that Mueller will issue some either preliminary series of findings, or there will be a round of additional indictments after the midterm. So time will tell. We'll see what impact that has. Any other questions? Any comments? Yeah. Oh, the New Jersey Senate race. Yeah, Indiana too. If we want to touch on that. Yeah, you've been on New Jersey for a while.
Look, I think Menendez probably pulls it out, but people view him as corrupt. He's not well liked, and they're going to take that out on him today, I think.
Mark, what about, you know, he still probably wins though, right? Indiana, your home state.
Close.
Democratic incumbent Joe Donnelly.
I'm rooting for Donnelly. Howard may even be rooting for Donnelly. I think Donnelly survives by the skin of his teeth. I don't think we're going to know who wins that. The polls close at 6 p.m. in Indiana, earliest poll closing in the country. But we aren't going to know who wins that race until CNN goes on the air at 1 a.m.
To Pete's point about the Senate, I mean, if Donnelly wins and McCaskill wins, I mean, Heller loses. No offense to Hellers.
Yeah.
In Nevada, then you need.
There's a path.
Yeah, there's a path. There is a path. Yeah. It's unlikely.
The greatest consequence
a
of a Democratic takeover of the Senate, in my opinion, is no new judges.
It's personnel.
Do they change the rules?
I don't know. They've fucked it up every time they've tried to figure out what to do. So,
And on that note.
That's a great note to end on, everybody. Emblematic of our times, right? Well, certainly.
Just channeling the president.
Yeah, sure.
Did you bleep that out on Facebook Live,
no.
Caitlin?
We're not on a delay.
No.
We're not on a delay. Well, I can't, certainly, Mark, Howard, thank you very much. I can't thank all of you enough for taking time out of your day to come and listen. You can, we've been at this all season long, so it is a bit surreal that we're actually here on Election Day. be that as it may, all of our content is online at copublicstrategies.com, so you can check that out. I'll be putting out some election drivel later. If you're interested, just drop me an email, and I'm happy to copy you on it, or follow me on Twitter tonight for who knows what'll come out of my thumbs. Michael, thank you again for your support and for joining us today. And again, for those of you who haven't made it to the polls yet, I certainly hope you will take the time to do it. It is, of course, consequential and important and your civic duty. So with that, thank you very much.
Thanks.